Greetings, Inquisitors. Welcome to Loquitur RPG. Have you ever thought that the spell descriptions in your role-playing game were a bit boring? Has your GM ever asked you to describe how that looks, and you just kind of sat there frozen for a moment thinking to yourself, well, I don't know, it's a fireball. I guess it looks like a big ball of fire. There's an opportunity in role-playing games to really change the way your spells, your effects, your characters look. And I don't think you have to be so absorbed in the rules as written that you lose sight of that. I will say when I started D&D so long ago, we had spells like Fireball that was a ball of fire, a lightning bolt that was a bolt of lightning, a sleep spell that put things to sleep. And we didn't worry too much about the spell descriptions because it felt like that was just how things were. Now, as an engineer, I can tell you that I always had a problem with Fireball because it went exactly 20 feet. And after that, suddenly, somehow, the person who was the 25th foot away was completely immune to the effect of the flames, which can't really happen. They can't dissipate within 20 feet, so that always bothered me a little bit. But hey, it's a game of the imagination, and you have to just have some rules and follow them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk through some stuff, and we're going to use that fireball as an example. So the objective, what does a spell look like when you cast it? Or what does that skill or that thing that you're doing, what does that look like? And the idea of reskinning, if anybody doesn't know what a reskin is, here's Cole Cassidy. And, we could play that character in the game and shoot people and have fun, and his voice sounds a certain way. Or we could get a skin for him, which in this case is a very simple reskin. And you can see pretty much all we've done here is change the color of his poncho. Here we got red with some yellow and gold, and here we have a different color poncho, but it's the same character. He talks the same way. His skills in the game are exactly the same. This has no effect on the game other than cosmetic, so it's just a reskin of the same character. League of Legends, for example, goes a little more complex into reskinning. Here's Leona. She's a tank-type character with a sword and a shield and, light rays and all kinds of stuff like that in her character kit. But let's say that you weren't into the goody two-shoes holy paladin business, and you thought to yourself, man, I would love it if this girl would relax a little bit. Maybe I'd play her more or be more inclined if she went to the beach and hung out in a bikini or something. So, hey, you know what? We'll reskin the character. And you can see in the middle they've done character art for it, so she's got a surfboard there and an umbrella. And in fact, when you put this reskin on her, she goes into the game in her beach outfit. It's not tasteless. It's it's a pretty tasteful beach outfit. And she uses the umbrella instead of a sword, and she has a surfboard as her shield. So it's a more aggressive reskin. It looks completely different in the game. The character has a very different feel between being the heavily armored holy knight and being the beach girl with an umbrella. But again, it doesn't change anything about the way the character works in the game. It follows all the same rules. So with the fireball, we've seen this spell description or heard it in some way before, for sure. A streak of light flashes from your finger, a bead of light, something like that. It floats out to a distance that you choose. And then when it gets to its point that you want, it detonates and blossoms with a big roar and an explosion of flame. Fire spreads around corners. It ignites flammable objects in the area that aren't being worn or carried. So we have a good description of how that spell works, and so we just leave it at that, right? And if the GM ever says, what does that look like? We say it looks like a little bead of fire that explodes into this big roaring ball of flame. But again, as an engineer, I didn't quite like that. So after many years of play and never realizing that this was an option, I changed my fireball. And so my description was more of an engineering description, right? I create a small bubble of force. And inside that force at the middle, there's a speck of red light. As the speck of red light and the ball of force move toward the target, the ball of force gets larger and larger, and the sphere starts to fill up with some kind of magic, okay? It expands as it grows forward, grown into a 40-foot wide sphere. 20-foot radius is a 40-foot wide sphere, right? Motes of magical power infuse the inside, and when it reaches the point of impact, an arc of flame from that middle part lances through and ignites all of this magical stuff in the sphere, and it detonates in a big conflagration of flame, generating intense heat and a massive deep bass thump, contained within the force field. So now I've generated a fireball. It does the exact same thing that every fireball in the game has ever done. It does everything that a fireball would do if it was cast and the color was yellow. It could be a purple fireball. It could be however you want it. It could be a explosion of glittering, sparkle, rainbow colors inside this sphere. I like the containment sphere as an idea, just this little temporary magical barrier, and now it very well explains why the person 25 feet away isn't hurt. They're not in the area of effect. So the sphere filled up with the magical motes, and it went to a certain place, and that sphere is what ignites, and stuff outside of it is not affected by it. So again, it's just an idea for Fireball. It's a different description. Now, Fireball can be cast as different elements. So Order of Scribes, Wizard, and other things will allow you to change the energy types, using sorcery points to change the energy type, things like that. So we could cast a lightning ball. So we do the same kind of thing, and the lightning inside this sphere goes insane, arcing with tremendous energy and sound, again, contained within my force field. Or it could coalesce into tiny drops of toxin raining down and sticking to everything and just burning it alive. If you, for example, changed it into an acid damage type. Could be a poison damage type. I don't even know. Bludgeoning damage type, I think, even for Order of Scribes Wizard. And you could come up with some idea of having, like, magical hailstones or something like that inside the sphere that do bludgeoning damage. So we can describe this spell in a number of ways. And we've just taken the Fireball, and this is a very simple reskin. It doesn't change much. It doesn't change the way the Fireball works. It just visually looks a little different and gets contained within a force field. So what can you reskin in a role-playing game? It turns out you can reskin or describe in your own way just about anything you want to in the game. It could be spells, be skills, it could be weapon attacks, it could be your appearance of your character. Everybody gets to describe and decide what their own character looks like in some way. And basically anything that you want to describe can be reskinned as long as it's within the rule set, your GM understands what's going on and you're not trying to confuse him, and you're not trying to gain some advantage on the rules. So we'll talk about some reskins and where players might look for some kind of advantage on rules that you really have to have, an honorable intent to work around. So if you're going to reskin, here's some things to think about. What is your race in the game? Your ancestry, your background, what influence does that have on your descriptions? If you're a warlock, for example, and you've sold your soul to an otherworldly being, there might be a lot of tentacles in your future. There might be a lot of spells that wouldn't normally have tentacles that you can just add tentacles into. If you have the spell Hellish Rebuke, it's a spell that you use as a reaction that does fire damage. Well, what if it was Fiery Tentacles? There's no reason that you couldn't describe the spell as I get hit, and as a reaction, these fiery tentacles lash out of nowhere and slather the enemy in burning gore, whatever. Like it could be some kind of description. You could just put tentacles in it. What does it do? It does exactly Hellish Rebuke. It does nothing more, nothing less. It's exactly that spell. You just describe it differently as flavor for your character. Okay? Next, are you more interested in the cause, how the effect is generated, or the effect, what happens when it happens? And I say this because if you're reskinning because you want to change the effect, that's not the right way to reskin. You want to change because you want to, you're interested in how the effect is generated, right? It's more the what, the how that comes before. It's not what actually happens in the game, because you're only going to follow the rules. That's the kind of the cornerstone. When you reskin Cole Cassidy, he doesn't do something new in the game. Maybe he has some new voice lines, but he doesn't play the game any differently. So that's the boundary conditions, right? And the last thing is, what will the rest of your group respond to, or what to avoid? So there's this idea of lines and veils, and if you've sat down with your table and had a good session zero, or you understand well exactly what it is that your table, like let's say for instance somebody at your table doesn't want body horror, and you keep describing all of your spells in ways that's manipulating and twisting your flesh, and your claws are oozing out of your hands and things like that. People don't want that, right? So if body horror is out, then leave it out of your descriptions. Don't use this as an excuse to break lines and veils. Stay within those. But if your group would respond well to that, and you'll know that from your group, like the groups that I play in, almost unilaterally, when somebody describes something and they've thought about it and they have a cool description, the whole table is smiling and nodding and going, heck yeah, and thinks that it's really a great thing. So it's a fun thing to do in a group. And honestly, it's about getting to know your character better. It's hard to communicate the character that you're role-playing, but if you can express that character through visual effects, sounds, smells even, whatever, in the game, that will help other people to know your character better. But you have to do it first, right? You have to get to know that about your character first, and then you can communicate it in the game. All right, remember that the game rules have to be followed. A rework is just for flavor, should not change how things work in the game. Let's use a second example here. We'll switch over to the Daggerheart role-playing system, and we'll talk about this returning blade. It's a finesse weapon, and it simply says finesse close D8 plus 1 magic, and it's a one-handed weapon, and it's a returning blade. There you go. You throw it out, it comes back, so you don't have to be in melee to use it. You can use it up to close range. We're playing a clank sorcerer in this case, and a clank is basically a warforged, a robot, what have you, some kind of a mechanized character. So just, again, we're not using the clank skills and all that. We're just role-playing off of this, right? We have to know that our character is a robot, and we have to know that our class is a sorcerer in order to kind of think of how we're going to use this returning blade, okay? When thinking about what kind of blade you have, it doesn't have to be a dagger or a knife. We thought of a chakram. So a chakram is kind of this circular-shaped weapon. It could either have that handle in the middle, or it could just be a hoop. I think Xena, Princess Warrior, had a version of a chakram that was literally just a circle of a blade. We've got a little bit fancier one over here to the side that's got like two scythe-type knives that are together on one middle handle, and it still looks like a chakram. So our returning blade could be something like this. We throw it out, and it's a magic weapon. It magically returns. It's called a returning blade. So we throw out this circle, it hits something, and it comes back. All right, sorcerers have a skill that allows them to use a stress to target 2 targets within range. So when they use that weapon, it's a magical weapon, meets the criteria, they can hit 2 targets. So we're going to use it like this. We're going to detach a circular blade from a mount where it is on a leg, and the robot's hand is going to start to spin around. They're not using their hand to spin the blade. Their whole hand is going to spin on the wrist. And they're going to spin this blade up faster and faster, and the light is glinting off razor-sharp edges as it accelerates. Throw that blade forward, it slices into a warrior on the way out, makes a carefully calculated arc, hits the archer on the way back, and then I activate the magnets in my arm, catch it, and start spinning it up for the next victim, right? Now, what did I do? I activated an ability in the game that allowed me to target 2 targets. I used a returning blade. I rolled. I did damage to them. I hit them or I missed them, right? The mechanics of the game are all exactly the same, but this is a cool description, right? You've got a robot, pulls out a chakram, spins it up with his little robot hand, chucks it out there, comes all the way back around, and you hit 2 targets on the way through. I think that sounds pretty cool. And now, instead of a returning blade just being like a dagger that you throw out, and when it sticks into something, it magically disappears and comes back to your hand, which is typically, I think, how we associate returning blades in D&D. This has a little bit of a science to it. And if you had multi-attack on a character, like in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, maybe you have a returning blade and multiple attacks. The same kind of thing. You could throw the blade out and hit multiple targets, and it comes back to your hand at the end. And if the GM says, well, no, it has to come back to your hand every time, why? Mid-flight, it's already on its way out, it's mid-flight, and I'm going to check to see if I can hit again, right? Did I throw it with enough skill when I first threw it that it hits and then hits again? There's no reason why the blade actually physically, in fact, has to come back to you in between hits. The mechanics are all the same. You're going to roll an attack roll, You can describe it however you want, or you should be able to. If your GM shuts that down and says, no, he doesn't want that, then I would ask why. I mean, it doesn't change anything. It's just a description. meditation rage. When we think about barbarians in D&D, most people play them like the Incredible Hulk. The character's noisy, angry, a bit out of control. They're making reckless attacks, and they're running around just going bonkers on everything. In the Unearthed Arcana playtest materials that for the new version of 2024 D&D 5e, they talk about a more feral style of rage. And so even in the feral style of rage, you feel more like the typical subclasses of the Zealot, the Berserker, the Totem Barbarian, the Wild Magic Barbarian. All of this stuff feels like a large, angry, hulking person. But I like, and have used before in games, this idea of more of a focus, more of a meditation rage, call it trance, call it focus. So instead of getting angry, you get quiet. Your eyes get narrow. The whole world around you goes silent. It's so quiet that even maybe you're absorbing the sound around you. My axe gets lighter. It's just an extension of my arm. I stare at the target for a second, and then I shoot forward like a gust of steel-edged wind. Maybe even talk quietly. Tell your GM what you're doing in this kind of angry whisper, intense whisper, right? Like my character's gonna go up and hit this guy twice. I'm super focused. I lock my eyes onto his. I can see where his defenses are. You're attacking recklessly, right? You're not looking around. You're not trying to see how to defend yourself. You're staring the guy down. And maybe that's your way of role-playing your reckless attacks. I want to keep eye contact with this guy. I want to intimidate him. Does it have any effect on the game? Are you making intimidation rolls? Probably not. I play with the GM. In this particular instance where I was playing the focused rage, I'm playing with a GM that kind of rewards this clever description. So occasionally he'll throw in little things like I do get an intimidation check, or the NPCs do respond to me in a certain way, and they're responding to the role playing, and that's a choice that he can make in the game. Your GM might make it or might not, but you can choose to describe things in a fun way like this, and your GM can choose to respond to them in a fun way sometimes. But almost always, if you're doing the same angry rage that everybody does, your GM probably won't respond to it. All right, so in combat, when I played a raging character, I do have a barbarian that's a very stereotypical barbarian, too, that I actually play in an active campaign right now. And he just yells and screams and sometimes, just does angry things at the opponent because, I mean, that's the kind of person that I'm playing in that particular campaign. Here you could do something like, I land strikes with consequence and let out a slow, controlled breath and stare at the opponent with an icy glare. So whether you're in your trance rage or whether you're having like a normal angry kind of rage, use descriptions like this and kind of reskin it. Now, in this case, consequence is actually the name of my halberd, so I named my weapon. The GM didn't give me a named weapon named consequence. I just decided that actions and consequences, I was providing consequences. It fits with my character's theme. So yeah, I named my halberd. And so I can describe, consequence does this, or I do this with consequence. And it's kind of fun. But occasionally you can, describe exactly what you're doing, how your rage is working. And with the focused rage, you can have these moments where you attack, and then, you spread out into a stance, and you stand quietly, waiting for the next move. And it's a very different feeling than the angry, ragey barbarian. It's cool. I like it. I thought it was clever when I did it. Of course, I think we all tend to think that the things we do are pretty clever. So in this case, I'm giving myself credit for it. I thought it was fun. The people at the table responded to it pretty well. They seemed to think it was cool. So there we go. Here's another very common one, Mage Armor. A lot of people use Mage Armor. It's a very good spell. It sets your armor class to 13 plus your dexterity without actually having to wear armor. It lasts for a long time, so a lot of mages will choose to use this. If they know they're going into combat, they'll throw it on, and it's better than robes or no armor or a lot of the light armor that you could have anyway. It's equal to like magical studded leather or something like that. So it's pretty good. It says you touch a willing creature who isn't wearing armor, and a protective magical force surrounds until the spell ends. The target's AC, the base AC, becomes 13 plus dex. And shields and other modifiers add on top of that, but your base becomes 13 plus dex. The spell ends if the target dons armor or if you dismiss it as an action. So what does mage armor look like? Most players, it's some kind of golden glow that settles in around them. Some players use it as a force field that's either around them or under their shirt. So they take the spell description quite literally. It says here in the spell description, a magical force surrounds you until the spell ends. So that's what they do. But this is your force field. Why do you have to describe it as a force field? Why can't it look like anything? It's a world of magic and imagination. I've rarely heard mage armor described like armor, but why not? And especially if you're a sorcerer and you're using mage armor, make it look nice, make it plate mail, make it expensive, make it look like you're somebody noble or royal, and there's nothing says you can't. So here's what mage armor might look like on a sorcerer. It's 13 plus your dex. That's what it is. If people see you and they think, oh my God, you must be somebody important, and they respond to you, it's not because you have mage armor that makes you look like you're royalty. It's because you have an 18 charisma, especially if you're a sorcerer, right? So people are going to respond to you in a certain way. And I think the armor helps pull that off, right? So now we've got another use for mage armor. One is if we're going into combat, we want to have the protection of the mage armor for combat mechanics. Another thing we could use it for, if we're going into town to negotiate and buy some stuff at the local shops, we might still want to use mage armor. That might be part of our persona. It might be part of how we want to look as a character. Yeah, I'm a sorcerer. I don't get to wear plate mail. But for whatever reason, as a character, that's what I want my character to look like. Why can't I look like that? There's absolutely nothing in the game that says you can't look like you're wearing plate mail. You just can't actually, in fact, make use of plate mail. Unless you take one level of fighter, like most wizards should take one level of fighter and 19 levels of wizard, but then you use real plate mail and that is your look. Sorcerers, I think, can get away with a little bit differently, but still, that's not a bad idea to take a level of fighter to start things off. But I digress. Anyway, so mage armor can look like anything. And maybe you want to look like you're heavily armored. Maybe you want to look specifically like you're not armored at all for some reason. So there's different ways that we could apply that in the game. Let's say we wanted to look more like a veteran. Like in this particular part of the campaign, people get respect if they were part of the war that happened, 20 years ago. And maybe just your character maybe did go to that war. Maybe you were a farmer, you avoided it, but you don't want to seem like a coward. So, you use this mage armor, but you make it look battle worn, right? Like you put on some kind of armor, you make it look beat up. And then you could say, yeah, I was back in the war 20 years ago. And, you can have your war stories or whatever. And maybe that's part of your character's personality. Again, that's not for every character that you're ever going to play. But if your particular character in a particular setting could make use of something like this, just make your mage armor look worn. Do people know it's an illusion? Sure. Because every now and then it's just going to fade away. The magic's going to end and your armor's going to go away. And they're going to go, oh, okay, that's mage armor, right? It doesn't change the mechanics of the game. Any people don't think things differently. They're not fooled into it. It just looks different. Maybe we could make, instead of force field, maybe it could be dark mist. So we don't really get a higher armor class. We aren't harder to hit. We're just harder to see. So now the dark mist surrounds us and we get a little bit more armor because enemies trying to hit us are slightly obscured. It doesn't give you obscured from ranged attacks. And this is what I'm talking about. If you want to describe your mage armor as a dark mist that surrounds you, you can't then tell your GM that he's getting disadvantage on ranged attacks or that you have partial cover. That's not how it works. It just increases your armor class. It could be a swirling mist of multicolored streaks like you're surrounded in a soap bubble. We all blew bubbles as a kid, I think, and you get some of the bubbles that have like shiny and colors around them. So maybe if your character's like more of a happy-go-lucky, frivolous kind of character, some kind of fey character background, maybe you have this little soap bubble around you as your mage armor. The last one I think I have here is a small sphere, a glowing sphere that like circles around you. This was originally a description of an Ioun stone that I liked. So the Ioun stone, you let it go and it just kind of hovers around you and it gives you a bonus just by being near you. And it's just kind kind of this, it's a nice visual effect to have this thing kind of floating around you. So here we have a small sphere that spins around us, but it's going fast. It's like everywhere, right? And people can see it. And what it does to provide armor for you, like let's say your armor class becomes 15 with this in effect, 13 plus 2 from your dex. So you have a 15 armor class, and somebody tries to hit you and they hit a 14 and they miss you. So you can describe that quite nicely by saying, as they swing, the hit's going to hit you for sure, and then that little bead of light just pings that blade right out of the way, strikes the enemy weapon, and takes the attack out of your arc. So it could be a fun way, and you've got this like, now if this character is more like some kind of gadgeteer or inventor, or maybe it's some kind of holy character where you could like logically explain why you've got a bead of light flying around you at insane speed. But yeah, these are all descriptions for mage armor. It's all different things that do the same thing as mage armor always does. All right, you bless up to 3 creatures of your choice within range within bless spell. When the target makes an attack roll or saving throw, before the spell ends, the target can roll an extra d4. This is one of the simplest and hardest hitting spells in the entire game. If you like statistics as much as I like statistics, you can run scenarios at anywhere from level 1 to level 20, and characters fighting against creatures that are supposedly at the right kind of challenge rating for the party. That D4, the amount of times that it will convert a miss into a hit or convert a failed save into a successful save, is so high that if you calculate the extra damage dealt on a statistical average or the average amount of spells avoided on a statistical average, this is, I believe, I have reason to believe, it's one of the single most influential spells in the game in terms of total damage output and damage avoided. It's that strong. Everything is based on a curve of matching a d20 average roll against the difficulty class and giving the characters a slight advantage with their skills and ability. So with Bless, it cuts that mischance down by that last few points, and it's really a big deal. So almost any party should have Bless up all the time, and your Bless should fit your cleric. The typical Bless that most people talk about, people's weapons start to glow. Maybe they get inspiring words. You give a speech, and the blessing you actually like cast a blessing, words of faith that inspire people, regardless of whether or not, I mean, we don't have to bring religion into it and talk about actual religion at the table, but if your character is a character of faith, they could speak words that influence people, and whether or not you have faith in that particular cleric's gods or beliefs or whatever, those words can still inspire you to do great things or to avoid attacks or whatever. It could also be a glowing crown. And these are good spell descriptors for, good clerics, light clerics, the typical, stereotypical holy people. This might be an adequate description, and it might be all you want. But there's a grave cleric. So if I'm a grave cleric and I'm blessing everybody, when I bless them, each person I bless gets their own personal ghost. A spirit hovers behind each target and starts to whisper advice to them on how to hit, how to strike, how to avoid effects, right? Attack rolls and saving throws, a spell comes at you, and the ghost whispers, move left. And maybe it gets it in time, and maybe you get a +4 to your roll and you avoid the spell. It's a different way to have a blessed spell. Whispering spirit might seem quite distracting, but again, it's role play, it's magic, and it does its job. A death cleric. How does a death cleric bless their allies? You would think that somebody who's concerned with shepherding people across from the living to the dead side of things probably isn't casting a whole lot of blessings just in, let's say, role-playing in character for that type of personality. But what if, when they do the blessing, they give you strands of necrotic energy and they guide it? And they say, okay, we need to put this giant in the grave. The 3 of us, these 3 people, these 4 people, if you upcast bless, you can get more targets. These people, I'm going to guide their attacks. We're going to get this done. So necrotic energy strands out from your character, wraps itself around the arms of these other characters, and you help guide their strikes and help them avoid attacks. Maybe it's a bit of puppeteering. We don't want to make slaves out of people or take their agency away from them. That's not what this is about. But we're just giving them like a guidance type thing, right? We're giving them some kind of guidance. It's powered by the power of death. Again, confirm with your table that this is okay. It's just a spell description. But you could do something pretty darn cool with a Death Cleric. It's different kind of bless, but it feels very Death Cleric, right? A Peace Cleric, it could just be a feeling of incredible calm. Rather than panicking and feeling fear, all of a sudden, everything calms down, everything slows down, you remember your training, and you go back to basics, and you just go in there like a contractor to get the job done. For a Twilight Cleric, maybe it suddenly feels like you're cheating even more than usual. Okay, that's a hack on Twilight Clerics I thought it'd be funny to put in here. That's a good description for a trickster-type cleric, maybe somebody who always feels like they're doing a joke, and then people just feel like they're having a laugh at the whole thing. Like combat's not that serious anymore, and maybe there's a way to cheat. So, all joking aside, it could be a description for a bless spell. Paladins could be a tendril of energy connecting you to each target, and you literally give them pulses of holy energy as they need it. When the bonus kicks in and is successful, there could be a flash of light between you and them. So it could be more of a kind of continuous thing. It makes it really hard to hide in the middle of combat, but if you're a paladin, you're wearing heavy armor, you've got disadvantage on your hide checks, you're the tank. I don't think a lot of paladins are trying to hide in the middle of combat. And anyway, the spell description doesn't necessarily have to prevent you from hiding. So, again, could be an idea for a paladin. Divine Soul Sorcerer. So here we're combining somebody who has like the raw magic power of a sorcerer with the holy energy of the cleric. So maybe in this case we have sparks that begin to radiate out, and we get little flecks of holy flame that stick to all the targets and energize them. Give them holy energy, and those sparks might continue to flow out the whole time the bless spell is active. And if you lose concentration, the sparks stop. Let's switch back to Daggerheart for a second and talk about Power Push. When we read the spell Power Push, make a spellcast roll against the target in melee range. On a success, they're blasted back to far range, take d10 magic damage. So you would imagine that from this spell description, Power Push, you make a roll. On a success, they're blasted back. It lends itself very easily to a specific type of description, and I think almost everyone in this case is going to default to the idea that they're being blasted back by some kind of magical force. I put out my hands, magical energy ejects from my hands, and I blast them forcefully back to far range, and they get pushed. And the spell is called Power Push, so you feel a focus on this word push. But why? Why do we care? In game terms, what we care about is there's damage done and the target is moved. It could be pushed. It could also be pulled. It could be raised up and dropped. It could be a lot of things. All we care about is that it does damage and it creates movement. And those things about the spell don't change. We're not going to change anything in the game rules. We're simply changing the skin, right? How it looks. Arcane energy swirls around my hands as the enemy watches me and tries to evade whatever magical spell I have coming. Instead, a spectral hand grabs them by the collar and drags them violently backward. So it takes damage. It's getting pulled and bounced around and, whiplashed back to far range quite suddenly. And it's looking at me. The whole time it's looking at me, I'm casting a spell that's going to pull it back that way. So is the push necessary? It says power push, but this is a power pull. And we could rename the spell. And we could just tell our GM that we're renaming this domain to Power Pull. Who cares? It's a game of imagination, so why can't it be a spectral hand that pulls instead of a magical blast that pushes? No reason. A magical set of legs appear. It's the back two legs of a donkey, and you just kick that dude flying. Magical, damage, movement. We've achieved all three with a cool spell description of a donkey kicking somebody backwards. Maybe you want it to be the leg of a giant showgirl with a high heel on, and she just boots him right in the chest with a high heel. I don't know. Maybe some crazy thing that fits your description, but have a big kicking leg or legs come out of nowhere and kick them back. A magical wrecking ball. I swirl my hand above my head, and high in the sky on a giant pendulum comes a wrecking ball, and it swings down, and I move out of the way, and it knocks this thing back to far range. Again, I don't know if your character wants a wrecking ball for some reason, but if you're a dwarf and you've been mining all your life, and maybe a wrecking ball is a nice description. Maybe you want like some kind of Indiana Jones type swinging blade that comes down and hits them, or maybe it's some kind of hammer or anvil that knocks them back. But something with like a pendulum kind of emotion. A gigantic magical bat swoops through, picks them up, and drops them at far range. And again, does the character actually get picked up and dropped? Well, if your GM doesn't like that description, they don't have to go with it. But the idea that a magical bat could just pick them up and fly them back and then drop them, they don't have to land prone. You don't have to use falling damage or anything like that. Just simply, or in this case, maybe the damage that you do in the spell is because of the falling, right? As long as it does the damage that the spell says, and it does the movement that the spell says, this can just be a description. So a giant spectral bat just picks him up, plunks him back at far range, and flies off with a little chitter. Okay, how about this one? Druids can use this spell too, right? So now a portal's going to open up, and two vines reach forward, and they grab onto each side of the target, and they're trying to pull that target in half, and they're pulling them back toward the portal, and then they suddenly fade. Right? So that it doesn't get pulled back into the portal, but it just gets pulled back, and they're trying to tear the character apart, the enemy apart, as they pull it back. Does damage, creates movement, it's fine. What if it was tentacles instead of vines? Could very well be some kind of crazy Cthulhu tentacles that come out of that portal. Anyway, anything that you can think of that creates movement and creates damage and is a reasonable description of that makes that spell a lot more fun. And by the way, for Daggerheart players, this is also one of those spells. It's low-key, it's a first-level domain, but I honestly think that it's one of the best crafted domain cards in the game. It's relevant at level 1, it's relevant at level 10, and what it does is only shared between that, and then there's a sorcerer spell that does an area effect version of that. But it's a very powerful spell, and I think it's something that you could keep in your kit for your entire character. It could be one of your signature moves. All right, so let's move on to Eldritch Blast, and this is for a character my daughter plays. She's playing a Warlock Paladin, pretty good multi-class. I'm just going to tell you about the character for just a second before we go into it, because I wanted something. My daughter's pretty young, so this is her first D&D character, and I wanted to be very simple to play. So this character is so nice. If you're not in melee range, you move forward and use Eldritch Blast. If you can move forward and get in melee range, you move into melee range and use Booming Blade. Very simple. Spells just don't get used. We've got Counterspell, we've got Shield. You only have 2 Warlock slots. You have a few Paladin slots. Use the Paladin spell slots for Shield. Use the Warlock spell slots for Counterspell. Very straightforward. You always do the same thing on your turn. You move forward in Eldritch Blast, or you move forward in Booming Blade. You get in, you tank, and you use your spells as reactions. Shield, Counterspell, and just leave it at that. There's some other options that we've used in the game, but otherwise, super straightforward character. But in that case, you're using Eldritch Blast so much that you really have to have a good description for this spell. So I was trying to teach my daughter. Again, it took me way too long to realize that you could just reskin and describe stuff however you want and have a lot of fun with it. So I wanted her to be able to just customize all this stuff going in. So we worked together on it, talked it through. Most people would describe Eldritch Blast as bolts of energy. Green energy, black energy. Somebody one time had gold Eldritch Blasts in the particular game. Some kind of necrotic or force or whatever they want it to look like. But it's basically they're beholden to this description of a beam of crackling light, right? Like once it says a beam of crackling light, that's in the spell description, and we're kind of stuck with that. But we're not stuck with that. So she chants ancient words of power. She takes a grip on the creature's life force. If it's got a soul, we can call it the soul. If it doesn't have a soul, we still have to have some logic for it, right? So we grab onto something within the creature and try to rend it out of the body. So now, instead of a bolt of something flying from us to them, we're making some kind of magical connection, and the bolt is coming from them toward us. Streaks of silvery mist come out of the creature and propagate back toward our hand. If we get a kill, then we actually successfully pull out their soul or pull out their life force or whatever you want to say. It's a warlock. It's not a nice, happy, friendly, smiley, let's do non-lethal damage kind of character. It's a, I've sold my soul for power, and I'm going to take that power into my sword, and yoink, the soul or the life energy comes back to your weapon and she absorbs the life force. If it's not a kill, then the mist comes out and then flows back into the creature, or sometimes flows out and then a little bit of it dissipates. But how much does it hurt to have your soul ripped out of your body? I imagine it hurts. So could we call that force damage? Well, that's what Eldritch Blast says. You do force damage. So that's all we're doing. We're pulling on stuff. We're creating force damage with a cool description. But now let's take this a step further. So warlocks have the ability to add invocations that affect their Eldritch Blast. There's an invocation where you can push targets. There's an invocation where you can pull. So if you push a character, we pull those strands of mystical energy out, and then we just release them suddenly. And when they snap back, the character is pushed back by the force of their life energy coming back into their body, right? Like they pulled against us, we started a little tug of war, and then I just let go. When you're doing a tug of war and one person lets go, the other person goes flying back. Let's say, for instance, they go 10 feet back. Wouldn't that be convenient? So that's exactly what the spell does. We let go, snaps back, skids them back 10 feet. The pull invocation. We pull so hard that the creature stumbles forward. It like instead of standing there and resisting it and pulling back, we pull so hard that they come forward. And there's your grasp of Hadar, or whatever that is, the invocation that allows you to pull creatures 10 feet forward. Now, there is some controversy. The rules as written, they don't say that you can only do one or the other with a single Eldritch Blast beam. You can only do one pull per turn, but you can do multiple pushes. So if you hit, like, let's say 2 targets, you could push 2 of them, you could only pull 1. For area effect like spike growth and things like that, people want to do one Eldritch Bolt, or just target one target, and they want to do a push, and then they want to do a 10-foot pull as part of that as well. And people say, well, you can't do both. My question is, why not? So in this case, because of the way we have the spell description, we pull so hard they stumble forward, and then when they start to resist and pull back, we let go, and they stumble back 10 feet. So within the same spell, we haven't had to recast or come up with some weird thing. We just grab their spirit, we pull on it, they come forward, we let go, they go back. So in the same Eldritch Blast, they've taken force damage, they've moved toward us, and they moved away from us. And again, if your particular GM kind of likes being able to make some kind of connection to reality to allow things, we've just made a connection with something that could very logically happen. So, rules as written, we could do that. Let's say you're more of a Cthulhu-style warlock with the ancient old one. I'm blanking. Anyway, the ancient power where you're basically worshiping Cthulhu. So, in this case, why couldn't your Eldritch Blasts be tentacles? There's nothing that says a crackling bolt of energy has to fly out of your hands. You do Eldritch Blast, and these flailing tentacles come from a tiny tear in space, and they grab the target and squeeze. If they grab the target and squeeze, is that force damage? Well, it's not bludgeoning damage. They're not hitting. They're squeezing, right? So we call that force damage. And however many bolts we get, that's how many tentacles come out. When we're low level, it's 1 bolt, it's 1 tentacle. When we're high level, it's 3 bolts, it's 3 tentacles. Whatever. Well, however your spell is supposed to work, describe it as such. It's exactly Eldritch Blast, it's force damage, and that's the effect. Okay? Let's say you're more of a fiery warlock. You want like a real fire theme around your character. You could have magical tiny hellhounds that speed out of your hand. So instead of an Eldritch Blast with like a bolt of energy where you can imagine like some kind of force coming and hitting the target, that force instead, the leading force, looks like a miniature hellhound. And it's weaving this trail of magical fire and smoke as it goes, and then it hits the target and smashes into him. It's still force damage, it's still Eldritch Blast, and you get as many tiny hellhounds as you would have bolts. And that's how simple it is. Or if you got 2 bolts and you shot them at the same target, maybe it could be 1 bigger hellhound. It's whatever. So it's all up to your imagination. Thieves' tools. If you want to build some character into your rogue, what do your thieves' tools look like? These are, again, tools of the trade. This is something like a bless spell for a cleric that's going to come up all the time. If you're a rogue, using your thieves' tools should come up quite often. So what kind of tools are they? Do you have fine master-crafted tools? Are they made out of silver? Are they fancy? How many of your tools could you describe specifically? Do you even know what's in the kit? Or maybe you have old trashy tools, you got hand-me-downs, so you've got a kit, instead of like 1 lockpick, you've got 7 lockpicks, and almost every time you use one, it breaks because they're just old and in disrepair, and you treat them more like a consumable. It weighs the same as a thieves' tool kit. It works the same as a thieves' tool kit. It doesn't give you any advantage or disadvantage. You're just describing something about how you use your tools. It says specifically in the D&D somewhere that the set includes a small file, a set of lockpicks, a small mirror on a metal handle, scissors. I think it says something like long or sharp-edged scissors and pliers or something like that. But anyway, it has this description, so you have a set of tools. And yeah, why not add tools? Who says that this is what came in your set of thieves' tools? The rules are guidelines. You can add more rules. And they don't even have to be real tools. But just clue your DM into what you're doing. Use it as role play. And let's say you have a spade. What's a spade? Well, it's a little tool. It looks like a teeny tiny spade, like a shovel, right? And maybe you can use that somewhere in your thieves' tool kit. Maybe you have a tension anchor. Well, what's that? Well, it's a little anchor with a string on it, and sometimes, you put the anchor in and you pull the string out and you use the string to manage some kind of mechanism. You could have a pointy sprawler, and I don't know, maybe that just pushes things apart. You could have a bicurve. I don't even know what a bicurve is. What's a cupper? Who knows? But you could just make up names. You could have a crack widener. You could have a blesper. You could have a subaswami. Just use fun stuff and describe how you're using it. And the GM says, oh, this is a complex lock the likes of which you've never seen before. And you say, oh, but I have. I believe that this is the exact kind of lock that I could use a subaswami on. It doesn't change a thing. It doesn't change your roll. If the DC was going to be 25, the DC is still going to be 25. Even if you claim you have the exact right tool for it, but it's fun role-playing, right? It's fun to say, no, I may have seen something like this before, right? This will be easy. I'll put the spade in and manipulate the mechanism with the blesper. Should only take a moment, right? You just throw these weird little tool words in somewhere in your description of how you're doing that. You say, hey, I want to pick a lock. And the GM says, what does it look like when you're picking locks? And sometimes you only get 1 or 2 opportunities to describe something like this, because once you've described it and the party kind of knows what your effect looks like, they'll think of that almost every time. The GM might ask you, has anything changed about the way you pick locks? And you just kind of confirm that it's the same thing. But this allows you to kind of manipulate it every time. You're going to make a check to disable a trap. You can throw in those tool names. Some GMs, again, I'm playing with a GM specifically that rewards you for good role playing, gives you little advantages in the game, and like leans into the stuff that you describe if you want to go through it. So this is the kind of stuff that would get you bonus points at the table. Here's a little story. I once named a lockpick Betsy. yeah, I got a critical success with it like the first time I used it, and it seemed clever at the time, so I just decided to name it Betsy. And then whenever I was using the lockpick, I would talk about, oh, Betsy's going to support me on this one. She's going to, and then like at level 4, I got a crit fail, and the GM broke Betsy. I don't know if he just didn't like the Betsy meme anymore, if it kind of gotten old for him or whatever, but he was like, the tool breaks. I tried to repair it later. It was beyond repair. I just had to get a new one. Okay, so Betsy was gone. But then for sessions afterwards, I lamented the loss of Betsy. Things have never been the same since I lost Betsy. Sometimes pick a lock. I don't know. There was one time where I was getting ready to pick a lock, and there was high tension, and it was an important roll, and I just started to cry, and the whole group is like, "What is going on?" I'm like, "Oh, if only Betsy were here, this would be so easy." But now it's so much work, And it gets a chuckle from a couple people, and it's kind of a dumb meme thing, and I got a couple eye rolls with it too. It wasn't like the best role playing in the world, but having given the tool a name was funny. And eventually the DM did lean into it. And we were at an NPC encounter, for example. We were in a town one time, and they asked, like, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you or something like that. I was like, oh, it was when I lost Betsy. And this NPC is consoling me, and, oh, I'm sorry. It's always hard to lose a loved one and all this stuff. And it was a stupid lockpick, right? So it became like a meme in its own right. So doing a little bit of this descriptive roleplay stuff can kind of lead to more character building, some fun stuff. So you can name all of your tools. So just take the standard Thieves Tools kit and just imagine a name for each one of them. And then it can kind of come up in weird situations, like if your character wants to be alone in one of your rooms in the inn, right? You want to just get a room to yourself. And everybody's like, no, we can put 2 or 3 people in a room. And you're like, no, I need a room alone. And they're like, no, we want to. And you're like, look, I'm going to be sleeping with Ruth, Jasper, Heather, Carla, Kurdim, and Big Rafe tonight. You gotta leave me alone. And they'll look at you and be like, what? How does that even work? Well, okay, you're just going to sleep with your Thieves Tools, right? Maybe they'll know, maybe they won't know. But having named them, hey, you could use Kurdim and Carla for a particular thing. And again, it's just role playing. And it's the idea that you have to get out of the mindset that everything's already described. Reskin your spells. You can reskin your Thieves Tools. You can change how your rogue plays. Again, because you touch those things so many times in the game, it becomes relevant and fun to describe them. Number 9, tattoo magic. So this is coming up for me. I have a character that's going to be using tattoo magic for his entire career, I believe. I've checked with my GM. He's okay with it. He understands that I will just be following the rules, that I like to reskin stuff, and that it's not going to change anything about how the way the game plays. It's just going to be for description. So he's agreed to it. And for example, here's something that I've already been working on. I clench my fist in front of me, and I've got a graveyard tattoo on the back of my arm here. The graveyard tattoo flares silver. A magical spectral grave is going to open up underneath the opponent, and pale hands of spirits long dead reach up and begin to claw at the enemy, trying to pull them into the grave. As the agony recedes, a single ghastly hand remains gripping on the lower leg of the target as the emanation fades. Grave comes, hands come out, tear at the enemy, and then the whole thing fades, and like one claw still remains, slowly fading down. What spell did we just cast? Can anybody guess? I'm going to put a little pause in the video here if you want to think about it and try to guess what spell I'm describing or reskinning. Then I'll move on and I'll show you what it's actually going to be. And most people will probably have guessed that it's going to be Chill Touch, right? A ghastly skeletal hand is in the space of the creature within range. It's got a 120-foot range, so it's massive. You make a ranged spell attack against the creature to hit it with the Chill of the Grave. On a hit, it takes D8 necrotic damage, and the hand sticks around and prevents that creature from doing any healing until the next round. And if it's an undead, it gets disadvantage against us, which is a nice little token effect, but it's rarely relevant. But anyway, preventing healing in the game is a thing. There's not many spells that do it. This is kind of the standard way to stop characters from healing. It gives you new and innovative ways to beat things like hydras and trolls and shut down their regen. So it's a pretty cool spell. Here's another spell. You point at creatures you can see within range, and a sound of dolorous bells fills the air around it for a moment. The target must succeed at a wisdom save or take 1d8 necrotic damage. If the target is missing any hit points, it instead takes a d12 necrotic damage. And that damage scales for both of these spells at level 5, 11, and 17, just like a lot of the other cantrips. Toll the Dead is recognized as one of the best just hit it and forget it kind of cantrips in the game. Almost always, if you're focusing fire like you should in D&D, there'll be a target that's lost some hit points, and you can hit them with a D12, 2D12, 3D12 damage. Wisdom saves are hit and miss on creatures in D&D. Some have pretty good will saves, but overall their wisdom saves really aren't that great. So this spell is going to hit quite a bit. The description I gave is both of these spells. If I'm using it as Toll the Dead, the hand just goes away. If I'm using it as Chill Touch, the hand stays there because the spell description says we have a spectral hand that stays there, right? So this description is going to work for both of these cantrips. I'll just let the DM know which one I'm using. And based on which one I'm using, of course, one of them is going to be, the Chill Touch is going to be a hit roll and prevent healing, and the other one's going to be a failed save. So the Chill Touch obviously does more damage against a wounded target, but there are times where your chance to hit with a spell is going to be better than their chance to fail a save. So you just kind of balance those two things. First of all, do I need to prevent healing? If it's just you're fighting bears in the woods, you don't care about healing. You're just going to use the bigger damage spell. But if the character were to have a good wisdom save, or they make a roll and they get like a 17 on a wisdom save, then you know that they've probably got a decent wisdom save modifier, and you might be better off trying to actually hit them with the Chill Touch instead. So it gives options, but this is a death cleric, and it's a description of how this death magic is going to work, and it's going to be activated out of this tattoo. Now, what it actually does in the game is exactly what they've always done. They're necromantic damage spells. I'm a death cleric. It gives the ability, when you become a death cleric, the domain thing says if you've got two targets within 5 feet of each other, you can hit both of them with the necrotic cantrip. So that's why we want both of these cantrips. Death clerics get to take the Chill Touch cantrip as part of the features. They get one cantrip from any class. That's necrotic damage. So we can take both of these, we can use them, mix them, match them as needed, and have a cool description for it. As I level up the characters and use different spells, this character is going to be adding tattoos. So Bless and Healing Word are going to have cool descriptions. Spirit Guardians someday could be fun. And maybe the Spirit Guardians is actually the same grave stuff, except now the grave opens up underneath me. And the skeletal hands are flying all around, and that's my for sure I'm going to be doing necrotic damage with my aura. You get to choose between radiant and necrotic. And even if radiant damage is better, I have to pick necrotic because of my character. It's going to be better for his role play. But we'll have a cool description for that. And then I want to go to my last example, and this is a tattoo crossbow. Now, we've talked about reskinning tools, reskinning skills, reskinning a lot of magic stuff. We talked about making a tattoo work for cantrips and spells. Now I'm going to talk about making tattoos work for everything. That's going to be my character's gimmick. So now, I place an arrow on the back of my arm. The scorpion tattoo activates, rises up, creates an illusion that's kind of like a bow, and then the tail whips forward, the arrow flies out and strikes true. The scorpion fades into mist and smoke. What did I do? I'm not actually casting a spell. It's not a cantrip. It's not a throw arrow cantrip. It's exactly a light crossbow. So the thing is, it's going to look like a spell. It's going to look like a cantrip. It's going to require ammunition. It's going to have the loading trait. It's going to be a two-handed weapon. So all of the stuff in game is exactly the same as a light crossbow. If you have a light crossbow and you have a tattoo, you have this idea that, well, I have a tattoo so I can't be disarmed, but that's not how reskinning works, right? Reskinning works if it's exactly the same rules. So if somebody tries to disarm my crossbow and makes me drop it, then something would happen to my tattoo and it wouldn't work. I would need an object interaction to pick up the crossbow. I would need an object interaction to get the tattoo working again. So we're not changing anything about the rules, we're just adding a new skin, but we have no visible crossbow. Something about this tattoo makes it weigh 5 pounds or whatever a light crossbow weighs. So we're not going to change the weight. We're not going to change the fact that we have to have that hand full all the time, even if we're not shooting the crossbow, all of that stuff. And when we're actually actively engaging in the crossbow, it's a two-handed operation. The same as if we were using a light crossbow. It's just going to look cool. Right? I think it's going to look cool. So that's why I'm going to use it. So we'll have a tattoo crossbow. And if I get a +1 crossbow, then the GM and I will just work it out and it'll, the tattoo will get upgraded, change color a little bit, something like that. You could tattoo everything. If I need flint and steel to start a fire, maybe a small newt tattoo comes to life and puffs a little flame and starts that fire. And it's a teeny tiny newt, so maybe, it tries 5 or 6 times unsuccessfully and it's blowing like little teeny sparks onto the wood and it's not working so well. So if flint and steel wouldn't work so well, the tattoo doesn't work so well either. It's exactly flint and steel. A torch. I raise my fist and on the back of my hand, I got a bigger fire newt. That activates, my whole hand is wreathed in flame and I'm holding up a torch. Well, if I burn that torch for a certain amount of time, it goes out and I lose that out of my inventory. It's no different than a torch. A 50-foot rope. Maybe when I'm using my rope, I have a snake tattoo that uncoils, and it might be a weird feeling for other characters to wrap themselves up in a snake. But hey, it's exactly a 50-foot rope. It comes out of a snake. We could have chalk. Oyster shell. An oyster gives up part of its shell and we can make marks with it. It's still a chalk, but it's a tattoo. A shovel could be a groundhog tattoo. I try to dig, and instead I use this groundhog or a gopher or something like that, and it comes out of my arm and starts digging. And maybe that tattoo drains me. Maybe it really is physically taxing to use that groundhog tattoo because I got to sit there and concentrate on it and have it dig. Well, if you were shoveling a hole, it would take a lot of effort. If I'm shoveling with a groundhog tattoo, it's the exact same amount of effort. It doesn't save me a dang thing. I could just explain it differently. Items should never weigh less. They should, like if I get thrown in jail, I can't claim that I have a rope coming out of my snake tattoo in jail. If I was put in jail, they would have confiscated my backpack. I wouldn't have a rope, so I don't have it in jail. And that's where you just have to play honorably and say, you know what? GM understands, I understand. I'm not going to try to pull a fast one and pretend like I have a rope or pretend like I still have my crossbow because I still have my tattoo. Okay? It's disabled. Anyway, that's kind of the idea, the theory, the flavor that I'm going to try to breathe into this character. So let's talk about reskinning in a summary. First of all, always follow the rules. We're not going to reskin to try to get some kind of advantage on the game rules. The idea is just to explain what is happening in the game in a way that's fun and characterful for us. The second is imagine something that tells a story about your character's personality. Changing the spells and effects are a way for you to get to know your character better so that you can describe it better to your allies at the table. Number 3, let your DM know if you're going to rename skills and especially if you're going to rename them in your VTT. For example, the Eldritch Blast we renamed to Soul Snare. So the spell as we cast it in the game is called Soul Snare, but the GM knows that we just typed the word Soul Snare in instead of Eldritch Blast. And so when he sees that rolled in the VTT, he's not confused or wondering what that is. It's exactly Eldritch Blast. The last thing is, very important, don't break lines and veils for your table for your descriptions. This is not an opportunity for you to describe things in a way that are uncomfortable for other players, and especially around things that it could be sexual in nature. If your table doesn't like that kind of stuff, don't try to put it into a spell description or a skill description and expect people to be happy about that, right? Follow the rules of your table, follow the courtesy and respect that your GM wants and deserves. at your table, and describe it in a way that's meant to be fun and build the character, not break down the communication and the respect within your team. So that's what I've got. With reskinning, I gave you 10 examples. I'm interested in your comments. So, hey, if you've got something that you've maybe you want to reskin it, but you've kind of got a mental block and you're like, I would love to reskin my lightning bolt, but I don't know how to do it. Just put it in the comments down below. Give me some feedback, give me some ideas, give me some examples that you'd like to see in the future. And, if I collect up on ideas, maybe I'll do another reskin video in the future, and I'll kind of talk through reskins for stuff that y'all ask for. But just put it in the comments down below. Let's start a conversation and see if we can have a little bit of fun with our tabletop role-playing games. I'm Darth Loquitur. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate you coming over here to Loquitur RPG. Please remember to hit that like button on the way out if you didn't hit it on the way in. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. And, subscribe and hit the notification bell. If I ever do live streams or anything like that, do premieres, then you'll know when that's coming on. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate each and every one of you. And I'll see you in the next Holocron.